The box had been sitting in her trunk for 11 days. Tilda Rowe knew exactly how many days because she'd counted them the way she'd started counting everything. Rent due in 4, electricity past due by 9, last protein bar eaten 2 nights ago. Numbers were easier than feelings. Numbers didn't ask why a decorated combat nurse was sleeping in her car outside a storage facility in Billings, Montana, rationing the heat because gas cost money she didn't have. She'd told herself she was just resting. That's what she told herself every night when she reclined the driver's seat and pulled her old army issue jacket over her shoulders. Just resting. Not homeless. Not broken. Just between. But the box in the trunk knew the truth. She'd packed it 3 weeks ago, the night she came home to find the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. It was a shoebox, brown, unremarkable, the kind that used to hold a pair of winter boots, and inside it, wrapped in a dish towel that still smelled faintly of lavender from her mother's house, were 8 years of her life, a Bronze Star, a combat medical badge, an Army Commendation Medal with a V device for valor, a deployment patch from her second tour, a folded letter from a colonel whose name she'd long stopped being able to say out loud. She hadn't opened the box since she'd packed it. She knew what it would feel like to look at those things now, like holding a photograph of someone you used to be. Tilda Rowe was 31 years old. She had 2 combat deployments, a nursing degree she'd finished on the GI Bill, 14 months working in the ICU at a regional hospital, and exactly $63 in her checking account. She also had, as of 3 weeks ago, no job, no apartment, and a termination letter that used the phrase "conduct unbecoming of a healthcare professional" to describe what she'd done. What she'd done was report her supervisor. What she'd reported was a pattern of falsified patient records that had led, she believed, with her whole chest, to the preventable death of a 72-year-old veteran named Harold Oates, who'd been discharged too soon because his bed was needed and his chart had been quietly altered to make the discharge look medically justified. The hospital's internal investigation had cleared the supervisor. It had not cleared Tilda. She sat in the parking lot of the Rimrock Mall on a Tuesday morning in October and tried to remember the last time she'd talked to someone who wasn't a gas station attendant. 5 days, maybe. 6. The box in the trunk had been there for 11. She drove to the pawn shop because she'd run out of other ideas. Not the one close to the hospital, she couldn't risk being seen, but one across town on the west side, tucked between a tire repair place and a tax prep office that was closed until February. The sign in the window said Billings Gold and Loan in red block letters, and below it, hand-lettered on cardboard, "We buy military collectibles." She sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes before she got out of the car. Inside, the shop smelled like machine oil and old paper. Glass cases ran along 3 walls, filled with rings and watches and hunting knives and things she didn't let herself look at too long. A man behind the counter was bent over something with a loupe, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the kind of deliberate quiet that came from a life spent handling other people's valuables. He looked up when the bell above the door rang. "Help you?" Tilda set the shoebox on the counter. She'd taken the dish towel off in the car. The medals were laid out inside in a row, the way her father had taught her to display them when she was commissioned, not scattered, not piled, but arranged with intention. She'd done it automatically, muscle memory, and then hated herself for it a little. "I'm looking to sell," she said. The man put down his loupe and came closer. He didn't touch anything yet. He just looked, the way people who knew things looked, slowly, taking inventory, not performing surprise. "These yours?" he asked. "Yes." He glanced up at her just once quick. She was wearing her old jacket, the army one, because it was the warmest thing she owned. She hadn't thought about that until just now. "Combat medical badge," he said, more to himself than to her. "Bronze Star with V." He paused. "You serve in medical?" "Combat nurse, 2 tours." He nodded slowly, like that explained something. He still hadn't touched the medals. The bell above the door rang again. Tilda didn't turn around right away. She heard the sound of nails on the linoleum. 4 sets, quick and light, and then a weight against her left leg, sudden and solid, and she looked down. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, fawn-colored and compact, with a tactical vest that had seen real use. He had pressed himself against her calf with a certainty that felt almost deliberate. His nose lifted slightly, reading something in the air she couldn't perceive. He was not asking for attention. He was doing something else entirely. Remy. The voice behind her was even unhurried. Remy, heel. The dog didn't move. Tilda turned slowly. The man in the doorway was maybe 35, broad through the shoulders, wearing civilian clothes that sat on him the way civilian clothes always sat on people who'd spent years wearing something else entirely. He had the look. She recognized it because she had it too, that particular quality of watchfulness that never fully left you, the way you always knew where the exits were, always clocked the room before you relaxed into it. He was looking at his dog with an expression that was somewhere between professional concern and something more personal. "Sorry," he said, addressing the pawn shop owner but glancing at Tilda. He doesn't usually. He stopped. The dog, Remy, had now sat down firmly on Tilda's left foot, not in an aggressive way, not even in a demanding way. He had simply decided with the absolute conviction of an animal that trusted its own instincts entirely that he was staying exactly where he was. The man came forward. He crouched down next to his dog and spoke to him quietly, the kind of low register that was part command and part something else. The way you talk to a partner, not a pet. Remy turned his head and looked at him. Then he turned back and pressed his nose against Tilda's left knee. The man stood up slowly. He was looking at the counter now, at the box, at the row of medals laid out in order. Tilda watched take them in. She saw the moment he registered the combat medical badge, then tracked left to the bronze star, then found the V device. She'd watched a lot of people look at those medals over the years, strangers at events, families at ceremonies, and most of them looked the way civilians looked at paintings in a museum, with a kind of respectful distance. This man was not doing that. He was reading them like a document. "2 tours?" he asked. She hadn't told him anything. "How'd you?" "CMB plus the V device." He said it simply, like pointing out a fact on a map. "That's not a desk assignment." She didn't say anything. He looked at her then directly, with the kind of eye contact that didn't perform anything. "Where?" "First tour, Kandahar. Second, Helmand." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, it was a subtle thing, the kind you only caught if you were watching. "Helmand 2016, 14 to 15, then 17 to 18. He was quiet for a moment. "I was there," he said. "Different unit, but..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Remy hadn't moved. The pawnshop owner had stepped back from the counter with the particular discretion of a man who had learned, over years in his business, when a conversation stopped being about commerce. "Why are you selling them?" the man asked. Not accusatory, not soft. Just direct. Tilda had prepared for a lot of questions in the car on the way over. She'd prepared for offers that were too low and the negotiation that would follow. She'd prepared for the particular humiliation of watching someone assign a number to the thing on her left shoulder that she'd earned lying face down in a ditch in Sangan with a tourniquet on a 19-year-old kid who was crying for his mother. She had not prepared for someone just asking, plainly, why. "Because I need to pay for somewhere to sleep," she said. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize on behalf of the universe, which she appreciated more than she could have explained in that moment. "You working?" he asked. "Not currently. What happened?" She almost laughed. It was such a big question. "I reported a supervisor. He falsified patient records. A veteran died." She said it the way she'd practiced saying it. Factual, level, without the part where she'd sat in the hospital bathroom afterward and shaken for 40 minutes. The hospital cleared him. Then they terminated me. He was quiet for a long moment. Where was this? St. Clement's, out on the east side. She hadn't said the name out loud in weeks. It came out strange. "I filed a complaint with the state nursing board, and with OSHA, and with the VA because the patient was a veteran." She paused. "They all acknowledged receipt. That's the last I heard. When did you file?" 6 weeks ago. He looked at her. Then he looked at Remy, who had not moved. "My name is Garrett," he said. He didn't offer a last name, which she noticed. "Can I ask your name?" Tilda, he repeated, not testing it, just placing it. "I'm not going to pretend I have a simple fix for what you're describing, but I know some people who might be able to move your complaint faster than 6 weeks of silence." She was very careful not to let herself feel anything yet. She'd been here before, or somewhere like it. A colleague who was going to make a call. A supervisor who's going to look into it. A human resources officer who had given her a card and a sympathetic look and then never answered her emails. "What kind of people?" she asked. "Veterans advocacy, legal, and one person at the state health department who actually answers her phone. He said it without heat, which made it more believable than if he'd said it with conviction. I can't promise anything, but I can promise that someone will look at your file before tonight. Remy shifted. He put his head down on Tilda's foot. She looked down at the dog for a long moment. There was something about the animal's certainty that undid her in a way that Garrett's words hadn't quite managed. He didn't know her. He had no reason to have chosen her out of everything in this room. He had simply arrived at her side and decided to stay with the absolute authority of a creature who trusted its own perception. She thought of Harold Oates. 72 years old, 3 tours in Vietnam, a daughter in Billings, and a garden he'd told her about during the nights she'd sat with him. Tomatoes that grew enormous, he said, because he talked to them. He'd been well enough to go home, he'd thought. His doctor had agreed, apparently. His chart had agreed. He'd died of a pulmonary embolism 4 days after discharge. She had found the discrepancy in his records by accident, cross-referencing notes during a night shift. She'd brought it to her supervisor, Dr. Fenn, directly, assuming it was a clerical error. The way he'd looked at her when she brought it up, not surprised, not confused, just very still, was the moment she understood it wasn't a clerical error. 6 weeks of silence from every agency she'd contacted. $63 in her account. A box of medals on the counter of a pawn shop. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Garrett didn't answer immediately. He seemed to consider it genuinely, which she respected. "Because Remy doesn't do that," he said finally, nodding at the dog. "Not with anyone." He paused. "And because what you're describing shouldn't be hard to prove if someone is actually looking." He pulled out his phone. "Can I take a photo of your termination letter and the complaint receipts?" She stared at him. "I have them in my car," she said. Because of course she did. She'd been carrying every document she owned in a folder in the back seat for 3 weeks. "I have everything." For the first time since she'd walked into this building, something in her chest loosened slightly. Not hope exactly. More like the first warning sign that hope was nearby. She looked at the man behind the counter. He'd been quiet so long she'd almost forgotten he was there. "I'm not going to buy them," he said, nodding at the medals. He said it gently, without judgment, the way you said something you'd decided privately a while ago. "Not today." She didn't know what to say to that. "Come on," Garrett said, moving toward the door. Remy stood up, shook himself once, and fell into step beside him, but kept glancing back at Tilda as if making sure she was following. She picked up the box, wrapped the dish towel back around the medals, not thinking about it, just doing it. She followed them out into the October morning. In the parking lot, she went to her car and got the folder. Garrett stood next to a pickup truck and didn't comment on the evidence of how she'd been living. The folded jacket in the back seat, the energy drink cans, the arrangement of a person who had compressed their life into a very small space. She handed him the folder and he went through it with the same quiet efficiency he'd used, looking at her medals, page by page, making notes in his phone. "This is your OSHA submission?" he asked, holding up one page. "Yes. Filed online. That's the confirmation number. And the VA complaint? Page 7. I sent it certified mail. They signed for it on September 19th. He nodded and kept going. Remy sat beside the truck and monitored the parking lot with the professional calm of an animal that had learned patience in environments where patience was survival. When Garrett finished, he handed the folder back. "The VA complaint is the one that's going to move this," he said. "Harold Oates was their patient. If his records were altered to push a premature discharge, that's not just a hospital liability issue, that's a federal patient safety violation. It should have been escalated 6 weeks ago." He paused. It wasn't escalated because someone didn't want it escalated. She'd known that. She'd known it alone, in her car, for weeks, without anyone saying it back to her. Hearing it said plainly by another person made her eyes sting in a way she hadn't expected and immediately had to manage. "I have a contact at the Office of Inspector General for the VA," Garrett said. "I'm going to send her your complaint number and the certified mail tracking. She's going to make a call today." He looked at Tilda. "I can't promise what happens after that, but it will not stay buried." She nodded. Her throat was doing something inconvenient. "Where are you staying?" he asked. The question landed flat and honest, the way he asked everything. "I'm working on that," she said. He didn't push it, which she was grateful for. He glanced at Remy, then back at her. "My sister runs a transitional housing program for women veterans," he said, "on 6th Avenue. It's not a shelter, it's an apartment building." She has a unit open. It's yours tonight if you want it. Tilda looked at him for a long moment. I don't take charity, she said. It's not charity, he said, without irritation. It's a program you're eligible for. You served 2 combat tours. You're a veteran in crisis. That's exactly what the program is for. He paused. And for what it's worth, you've been carrying this alone for 6 weeks. You don't have to anymore. She looked down at Remy. He was looking at her with the calm, unhurried attention of a dog who had made a decision and was at peace with it. She thought about the box in the trunk, about Harold Oates and his tomatoes, about the eviction notice and the folder and $63, about the 11 nights she'd counted her way through. She thought about what it had cost her to walk into that pawn shop this morning, the way her hands had shaken putting the box on the counter, the way she'd told herself that this was practical, just money, just numbers, just a transaction, and how none of that had been true at all. She put the folder under her arm. Okay, she said. The sword came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. Okay, she said again. Garrett nodded once, already back on his phone. Remy stood up, stretched, and walked over to sit beside Tilda's car in a way that seemed, to her, entirely intentional. She got in the driver's seat and sat for a moment. Through the windshield, she could see the pawn shop sign in red letters, "We buy military collectibles." She looked at the shoebox in the passenger seat, where she'd moved it, not in the trunk anymore, beside her, where she could see it. She'd come here to sell the thing that was left of herself. She was leaving with it still. 14 days later, Garrett's contact at the OIG called Tilda directly. The investigation into Dr. Fenn and St. Clement's had been formally opened. The altered records in Harold Oates's file had been flagged as part of a broader pattern. 4 patients over 18 months, 3 of them veterans, all prematurely discharged with documentation that had been quietly adjusted to justify the decision. The pattern had been invisible in isolation. It had only become visible when someone looked at all 4 files at once, which was what happened when someone at the OIG actually looked. The nursing board contacted Tilda the same week. Her termination was under review. They used careful language, potential wrongful termination, pending investigation findings. But the woman on the phone, whose name was Carol Deming, and who had a voice like someone who had been tired of bureaucratic delay for about 20 years, told her off the record, "You did everything right. I'm sorry it took this long." Dr. Fenn was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. The hospital's chief medical officer issued a statement about their commitment to patient safety that said nothing and meant nothing, and that Tilda did not read more than once. She was offered reinstatement at St. Clement's. She declined. She accepted a position at the VA hospital on the south side of Billings in the ICU, starting the first Monday of November. The director who hired her, a woman named Dr. Anselm, who had herself served 2 years as a flight nurse before transitioning to civilian medicine, had read Tilda's full file before the interview and opened the conversation by saying, "I already know what you did. I wanted to meet the person who did it." Harold Oates's daughter, a woman named Brenda who was 53 years old and worked at the county library, had been contacted by the OIG as part of the investigation. She called Tilda 3 weeks after the formal opening. The conversation lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Tilda didn't plan for it to. Brenda told her about the tomatoes. She told her that Harold had talked about a nurse. A young woman, Army vet, tough but kind, his words, who used to sit with him during night shifts and let him tell his stories. He had told Brenda, in the weeks before his discharge, that this nurse was the reason he wasn't scared anymore. Tilda had to leave the room for that part. She stood in the hallway of the veterans' apartment building on 6th Avenue, in the unit that had been hers for 3 weeks now, and pressed her back against the wall and breathed through it. She went back and kept talking. She moved into a permanent apartment in December, a 1-bedroom on the north side, 3rd floor, with a window that faced east so she could see the light change in the mornings. She bought a coffee maker. She bought a plant, a small one, succulent, low maintenance, the kind that didn't need much to survive. She put it on the windowsill. She kept the medals. She didn't put them away. She didn't frame them or display them on a shelf like trophies. She left the shoebox on her dresser, closed, the dish towel folded neatly on top of it. She knew they were there. She didn't need to see them to know what they meant. She saw Garrett twice more in those months. Once, when Remy's annual checkup happened to be at the same VA clinic where she was getting her own follow-up care, which was either coincidence or not, and once for coffee at a diner on Montana Avenue, where they talked for an hour and a half, mostly about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Remy fell asleep under the table both times with his head on Tilda's foot. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did Garrett. Some things didn't need explaining. They just needed to be witnessed. The way certain kinds of recognition happened not through words or reports or formal investigations, but through a dog pressing his weight against your leg in a pawn shop on a Tuesday morning in October, certain of something before you were, staying put until you understood that you deserved to be stayed for.